Welcome to the YourTown television program. My name is Jeff Kline, for your host of this segment of the Naval Postgraduate School's Foundation segment of YourTown television program, where we bring you interesting faculty and students at the Naval Postgraduate School. This time we have a guest who is the Chair of Systems Warfare at NPS, Active Duty Navy Captain Chuck Good. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jeff.
Now, before we go, we're going to learn a little bit more about you and your career, because one of the fascinating things about having the postgraduate school here is both our students in uniform and our military faculty who come and actually participate in the local community as well as the school itself. But you're neither. You're neither student nor military faculty.
Neither fish nor fowl.
So you're the chair of surface warfare. Tell us a little bit about what that is, how that came about, and who you really belong to.
Well, yeah, you'll notice that my name tag is not the traditional black with the NPS crest on it. So I actually work for the Commander Naval Surface Forces Pacific, three-star Admiral Vice Admiral Rich Brown down in San Diego, California, headquarters on lovely Coronado.
Right.
And he is in charge of manning, training, and equipping all of the Navy surface ships in the Pacific Fleet, on the West Coast and Japan and all the way till the Middle East. And so he's also the lead for the surface warfare community throughout the Navy, sort of the community boss, the community father, as it were. And so there was a sense that, we've got a lot of our younger officers up here as students of NPS, and so it would be wise to send a senior person up there to kind of shepherd them, to broker research projects that would be of interest to the community. And so a memorandum of agreement was cut between Admiral Brown's predecessor, Vice Admiral Tom Roden, and Admiral Rout here at the Naval Postgraduate School, which essentially said that Surface Forces will provide one Navy captain, and in return he will get an office, and the NPS will pay my electric bill and allow me to meet with students and faculty and essentially be a presence on campus.
Well, personally, I believe that was great wisdom on all the admirals' parts to make that decision, to have a community representative here to not only take care of our lieutenants, but also to leverage NPS's research for the goodness of surface warfare, which I want to get into later in the show. We're going to talk a little bit about you personally now. First, surface warfare is, of course, that community which mans our destroyers, our frigates, our amphibious ships, and some of our support ships at sea. So there's the real sailors left in the Navy is what I like to call. So tell us, how did you get involved? How did you decide to join the Navy, and what made you go surface warfare?
I grew up in Southern California in a town called Huntington Beach down in Orange County. And,
that's a pretty nice place to grow up.
Pretty nice place to grow up. It definitely gets you close to the water.
Yes.
But right next to Huntington Beach, in between Huntington Beach and Long Beach, is a little place called Anaheim Bay, where all of the weapons for the Navy surface force are stored. And so ships have to pull in there to onload or offload ordnance all the time. And so as a kid, I just remember driving down PCH, and there's a bridge on PCH that crosses right over that weapon station. You get this beautiful view of the ships that are docked there. And so growing up on a steady diet of seeing Navy ships pulled into that little pier, that just left an indelible imprint on my mind, and that's all I really ever wanted to do.
So you're the first Navy person in your family?
I am.
Well, that's fantastic. You wouldn't meet many first generations anymore. So did you go to the academy, or where did you go to school?
I did. I went to the Naval Academy at the ripe old age of 17, and pretty much had my eye on surface warfare the whole time.
Just because the ship's going in and out?
I think it was just, what gets into your brain as a 5-year-old sometimes stays there. So
in more ways than one.
Indeed.
That's exactly right. So tell us, what were some of your first duty stations?
I have kind of bounced around between ships, primarily in San Diego on the West Coast and Norfolk, Virginia on the East Coast, although I did do a stint out in Japan as well as one in Southern Europe on a NATO staff. So I've kind of bounced around the world a little bit, primarily cruisers and destroyers and staffs that deal with cruisers and destroyers.
And what were your jobs on the cruisers and destroyers?
I was an operations officer on both a cruiser and a destroyer, chief staff officer of a destroyer squadron, things like that. And of course, I was privileged to have command of both a destroyer and a cruiser.
And what type of destroyer? What was she?
USS Kidd, DDG 100 out of San Diego, and also the cruiser Princeton, CG 59 out of San Diego.
I'm sorry, the reason I'm smiling, of course, I remember a different USS Kidd than DDG 100.
We've been through a few generations, and I think the World War II one is actually a war museum in Baton Rouge, Louisiana right now.
Well, that means you had a lot of at-sea experience, both on the East Coast and the West Coast, which means you've deployed to and through the Mediterranean, I'm sure the Indian Ocean, throughout the Pacific. Tell us what were some of your most memorable at-sea experiences.
You know, being at sea, I think, is inherently a memorable thing. I think you're just immersed with the beauty and the romance of it, although obviously the daily grind sometimes makes you forget about that. But I think I go back to my last experience. My last day at sea, we had taken Princeton out of the shipyards for her midlife modernization. So
now,
we've been
Princeton
in the
is a cruiser.
Cruiser.
Yeah, large cruiser.
And we had been in the shipyards for about 16 months, which is pretty miserable.
Oh my gosh,
There's nothing more miserable than a ship that can't go to sea and a crew that can't go to sea. And so, you know, after 16 months of that, we were finally afloat again, and we did our sea trials, and then we had to prove out all of our new weapon systems that were freshly installed. So we got to shoot a bunch of missiles and torpedoes and shoot our guns, and we did really well and all that. And so the last day, as we were heading back to San Diego, it was just one of those picture-perfect days off the Southern California coast. You know, it was in June, it was glass calm, it was a nice breeze, it was about 70 degrees, and we had a cookout going on the fantail. And as we were kind of munching on our hamburgers and just looking at the beauty, I got a call on the radio from a friend of mine that was CEO of an aircraft carrier who happened to be transiting the op areas, and very unusually for a carrier operating alone. And he said, "Hey, why don't you come over here and let's get some pictures?" And so I just pulled up next to the carrier and just enjoyed that glorious beauty sort of in that manner. And what a mic drop. It was a good way to end up my time at sea.
Well, that's a fantastic story. Now, that's a good side. What were some of your more challenging experiences at sea?
Well, and I think the big challenge of being at sea, as you well know, Jeff, is just the grind. You know, it's a lot of work, and it's hard work, and sleeplessness, and administrative minutia, and you know, sometimes that takes a toll on people, and it makes you forget the good stuff.
Yeah. Well, actually, as time goes on, you forget all that. And you remember your last day like Princeton, for crying out loud. So those are the things that we hold on to that make it so valuable. Command at sea is, of course, a very special thing in being a captain of a ship. In fact, we have more admirals than we have captains of ships at any one time. So that's a very honorable position, and we want to thank you for taking those that positions for both the destroyer and the cruiser. Let's talk a little bit about that cruiser, though, before we jump into your current responsibilities, because the roles of a cruiser primarily at sea today are what?
Well, the cruiser is primarily the air defense command ship for a carrier strike group. So as a carrier deploys, obviously we want to defend that carrier, and we want to be able to operate with air superiority between the fighters that the carrier carries and the surface-to-air missile batteries that the destroyers and the cruisers have. And so the cruiser is kind of the nexus for that effort, and the cruiser CO by definition then becomes the air defense commander for the strike group. And so the cruiser, although we're not much bigger than a destroyer these days, the differences are slowly mitigating themselves over time. It's the extra command and control, the extra radios, the extra personnel, and the more senior commanding officer that really make that a command and control platform as well as a fighting platform.
Well, now, the reason I ask you that question is because it makes you uniquely qualified to fill the position you do now. Of course, any senior surface warfare captain, based on their commands and where they went, in a way, have years of operational experience. But your experience as the air defense commander of a tactical battle group, for example, allows you to think about, okay, what do we need at sea? What needs to be researched here at MPS? What new technologies could help us out? What manning programs could help us out? So I think your selection for this job was excellent. So let's talk a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit about the surface line or surface warfare students that are at MPS, some of the things they're studying, and some of the research that they are providing the surface warfare community.
Sure. Our community sends our students here fairly young. We would call them mid-career, but they're kind of at the early point of their mid-career.
The first third.
The first third of their career. And so, you know, on a shipboard, there's essentially 3 levels of command for officers. There's the division officer, which is sort of your introductory tour. You're kind of learning the ropes. You're earning your warfare qualifications. You're running a division of anywhere between, you know, 6 and 20 sailors. You know, the intermediate level is the department head, who has 3 or 4 or 5 divisions under them. And then, of course, you have the XO and the CO that are running the entire ship. And so we get them between that first and that second level. So between sort of the apprentice and the journeyman, is kind of when we get them, and it's a great time. We've taken all
So
the
they roll
learning,
from that division officer C job into MPS.
yes,
right?
exactly. So we take all that at-sea learning that they've had, that practical, hands-on, OJT, and now we put them back in a classroom, and we give them the critical thinking. We give them the broad exposure to intellectual concepts across campus, and then we send them back out to sea as a middle manager. And we expect a little bit more out of them in terms of their mental capacity as well as their ability to administer and lead their sailors.
So what are the things that they study at MPS? What are the broad categories?
As an unrestricted line community, we tend to be generalists, and
Right.
so we are spread across campus. There are at any one given time, about 110 surface warfare officers spread across the 4 schools at NPS, and making us the largest single contingent of Navy students on board the campus.
Well, it might be the single contingent community of any officers of any community, I think.
Well, if you count like the Marines or the Army contingent or whatever, they're a little bit
Well, now the
larger,
Marines have communities too.
They do. One tends to think of them as a monolith, but yeah, you're right.
Well, everyone's a
among
rifleman for sure.
There you go. But among the Navy students, I think we're the largest contingent. But we're spread out. I don't think the SWOs are a majority in any curriculum, but there's always 1 or 2 in every curriculum, which I think makes us somewhat unique on campus, somewhat ubiquitous. And it's hard to get rid of us, hard to avoid us.
So you have meetings with these surface warfare officers periodically, once a month, once a quarter, to talk about different research that they might be able to do. So tell us a few of the topics that you at least present to them, and then we'll talk about things that past students have done.
Sure. Well, the purpose of getting the SWOs together not only is to broker research to them, but it's also to keep them connected to the community. When you were a student here as a surface warfare officer, when I was a student here as a surface warfare officer 22 years ago, there was nobody filling that role. And so you left this time in the fleet where you were intensely connected to your ship, to your crew, to your wardroom, to your job, and then you were put into this academic environment, which was wonderful, and you're here on the Monterey Peninsula, which is wonderful,
Right.
But you were a little bit adrift from everything that was then going on in the fleet. The fleet kind of continued, and you were kind of in stasis here, and the re-entry a couple of years later could be a little bit rough. Now, some would say that may have been a bug or a feature to be kind of apart from the fleet for a while, but I think the sense of somebody who's bringing in fresh information about changes that are being made, new policies, responses to the unfortunate operational mishaps that we've had, and the ways that we're changing our practices or amending our practices, keeping our students current on their profession, in turn allows them to be more current in their academic research.
Oh, certainly.
Segueing from that into the topics of interest. So on the technical side of things, in the engineering school, I'll give you an example right now. We have a team of distance learning students that are examining the fitting of laser weapons onto our surface combatants, and
right.
What it takes in terms of electrical power and cooling capacity, and how to scale that to the appropriate size laser. And that's in support of actually a real-world installation that's going on right now on board USS Portland. In your own school and in your own discipline of operations research, of course, we could call out your thesis student, Lieutenant Tanalega, who just did a masterful job of modeling operational tactics for unmanned systems operating with fleet units to conduct ship versus ship combat. And that will inform tactical development in the surface force for many years to come.
Well, let's brag about John here for a minute. He just got an award, didn't he?
He did indeed. The
Yeah.
Military Operations Research Society Award, the Tisdale Award for the Outstanding Operations Research Thesis. And again, I think
That's exactly right.
both the quality of that and the operational nature of that topic is something that the fleet will be able to use, and we've got people already knocking on the door asking to see that thesis to inform their decisions. In the business school, the Graduate School of Business and Public Policy, as we learn from some of the operational mishaps that we've had, and we've kind of had our eyes open to perhaps some practices of ours in training and manning that need to be corrected. We've got a couple of theses that are going to deliver later this month that I think will be very influential in looking at shipboard manning and the models that we use to deliver sailors to the ships, and hopefully we'll increase our shipboard manning and mitigate some of those problems.
Well, now, you don't just leverage students. You also leverage faculty, the work and the research that they do as well. So let's talk a little bit about how you have although Dr. Anita Shattuck began her sleep cycle studies, which, by the way, she was on a show once here.
Good.
How have you integrated her work and better communicated her work to the surface fleet? And for the audience, recalling that her sleep cycle studies help us determine best watch rotations in order for people to become alert and maintain alertness during a watch, while at the same time, although maybe not getting all the sleep they need, at least getting more than they would normally.
You're absolutely right. And in fact, my role has been more or less a door opener for Professor Shattuck. She's well known in Navy circles, starting with the aviation community and the submarine communities in terms of her work on human factors, human systems integration. Her expertise in that human circadian rhythm was really important to the surface Navy starting a couple of years ago as we started exploring how do we need to reshape the way that we've traditionally stood watch on ships to take advantage of these principles. And so she's now doing what we call a road show where I'm able to escort her to various fleet concentration areas to Norfolk and San Diego and Pearl Harbor and Mayport and Yokosuka, Japan, and brief our shipboard leadership on these principles. And in fact, within the last 6 months, the Surface Force has actually formally adopted them as a requirement for surface ships, no longer a suggestion, but an actual requirement. And it's based on research that was done right here at the Naval Postgraduate School by Professor Shattuck and her team.
And what other faculty might you engage in this area? Not just sleep area, but I'm sorry, to help the surface warfare community.
Well, we've gone to, as I mentioned, the business school to look at some of our manning issues, and a senior lecturer there, Bill Hatch, has been very influential in his knowledge of Navy manning practices. We've got retired Vice Admiral Terry Blake also in the business school, who has been a faculty associate teaching some very specialized courses in Navy budgeting. And of course, he was the budgeteer for the Navy for many years, and there's probably nobody that knows more about Navy financial management, and he's a surface warfare officer. So he's been providing a lot of leadership and mentorship to our students over there. And I would be remiss in neglecting our School of International Graduate Studies. Although surface, policy is not made by warfare communities. Policy is made at the DoD level and at the national level. Yet our SWO students there have been producing some really interesting theses supported by the faculty, things as diverse as a new strategy for narcotics interdiction in Central America, to how to better incorporate our missile defense systems into Southern Europe. And those are a couple of the recent theses that we've been working on in that side of the campus.
Well, we only have about a minute left, and you mentioned that you graduated from Naval Postgraduate School. Tell us a little bit about that experience, and does it differ today at all, and what do you enjoy most about living in Monterey?
Okay, yeah, I graduated 22 years ago from the National Security Affairs program with a concentration on NATO, Russia, and Europe. And of course, back then it was an interesting time, as it always is interesting time. The wall had just fallen, and so there were questions about what NATO was going to be like, and were the Russians our friends now, or were they our enemies? And funny, we're still asking those questions, aren't we? So
yes,
we haven't.
It's cycled around.
We have not solved them, but we certainly have gotten a better appreciation for them thanks to the work of Naval Postgraduate School. So it's funny, the campus has changed very little, but the organizational structure, the degree of research that we're doing has changed significantly. And I've been very impressed with how the institution has evolved and progressed to be a research university instead of just a pure teaching university. And I think that's a very powerful thing for our Navy and our nation. And what I like best about living here in Monterey is I didn't probably appreciate this as a student because I was a single guy, but now that I'm the father of a couple of young kids, I really appreciate there's a kind and generous spirit on this peninsula for children. And the variety of children's programs and the excellence of those programs is really overwhelming at times. And I feel very grateful to be living here, Jeff.
Well, Chuck, thank you very much for your work, because you are a conduit of that research to our fleet, and to make sure that the work and research that we're done here actually strengthens our fleet in that area. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Jeff.
And thanks for being on the show.
You bet.
And thank you for joining us on this segment of the Naval Postgraduate School Foundation's YourTown television program. Please join us again in the future, where we'll highlight interesting faculty and students and research that we conduct at the Naval Postgraduate School.